I coordinated intake for the sanctuary office for 6 years before Asen, and in that time, I learned the particular shape of a silence everyone has agreed to keep. The Osseran's distress call had been running for 190 days by the time anyone outside the Velkrin Assembly's quarantine line listened to it properly, and I am not proud that the someone was me, only because nobody else was left to do it. Asen's magnetosphere was dying, not under attack, not poisoned, not punished for some old grievance. Just old, the way a planet's core can simply slow past the point of holding a field together. Without the field, the solar wind had nothing to push against, and the atmosphere had started bleeding into space in long, visible streamers that you could watch from orbit if you had the stomach for it. Radiation that the air used to stop was reaching the surface in pulses now, worse every season, and the Osseran had maybe a year, maybe less, before the storms made the open ground lethal. The Velkrin Assembly, the 7-species compact that held the trade lanes on that side of the dark, looked at a planet venting its own air into the void, and did not see a dying world. They saw an unknown failure mode they couldn't rule out as contagion, and they sealed the system rather than risk finding out the hard way. Every relay station for 40 light-years filed Asen's calls under hazard and moved on. I understand the fear. I have never once respected it. I should say what Harrow Relay actually was, because it matters to what came after. It is a small platform, crewed in shifts of 9, sitting at the very edge of the Velkrin quarantine pattern, doing nothing more glamorous than logging traffic and relaying weather data for the freight lanes that skirted the dead zone. We were the last human-staffed post before the boundary, which made us, by accident of geography, the last place in the galaxy still listening in Asen's direction at all. I had spent 6 years there processing intake requests for the sanctuary office's resettlement programs. Paperwork mostly, the unglamorous machinery that decides who gets a berth and how fast. And nothing about that posting had prepared me for what it meant to be the only ear left open on a dying world's line. I was working traffic at Harrow Relay, the last crewed platform before the quarantine boundary, when the signal came through clean enough that I couldn't file it the way the others had. It wasn't a panicked burst. It was methodical. Coordinates, head counts, a tally of who was still breathing updated once a cycle, like someone refusing to let the numbers slide into noise just because no one was answering. I pulled the log, sent it up through every channel I had clearance for, and then sent it up through a few I technically didn't, because by then, I had stopped caring whose desk it landed on as long as it landed. Earth didn't send a fleet first. That's the part people leave out when they tell it big. Earth sent one quiet survey ship through a gap in the quarantine pattern, running full medical and atmospheric scans, because the first thing anyone with sense does before crossing a line like that is find out what's actually on the other side of it. The ship's logs, which I read later, show nothing dramatic. Atmospheric composition readings taken every few minutes, a slow pass over 3 of the larger settlement clusters, a handful of remote biometric scans pulled from people who never knew they'd been checked. No pathogen signatures. No structural anomaly in the planet's core that anyone could point to as deliberate or engineered. Just iron cooling at a rate nobody had bothered to predict, and a magnetic field running out the clock it had been given. 40 hours later, the answer came back clean. No contagion. No anomaly. Just a magnetic field running out of road, and 490,000 people standing in what was left of the daylight, watching their sky go strange. After that, there was no more discussion. The sanctuary office didn't debate percentages or draft a phased intake schedule. They opened the manifest and started loading. I watched it happen from Harrow's long window, which is the closest thing I have to a confession, because what I watched looked less like a rescue convoy and more like a small migration. Transports first, 6 of them, broad-bodied and unhurried, the kind built to carry families and their belongings, rather than cargo pallets. Then the hospital ship, the Tessely Hale, white-hulled and slow, falling in behind like she had nowhere else in the universe to be. A light escort flanked them, not for show, for the assembly patrol boats sitting at the boundary line, who might have had opinions about humans crossing it. Nobody fired. Nobody even hailed. The escort simply held position at the line like a closed door propped open, and the rest of the flotilla went through. I have read the assembly's official statement since. It called Earth's action an unsanctioned unilateral intervention with uncertain epidemiological consequences. I have also read the transcript from the Asen ground relay. where a junior controller, hearing the flotilla's IFF tags resolve on his screen, said only, "They're real. They're actually real," to no one in particular, and then went quiet for 11 seconds before he could finish his report. The extraction ran for 60 hours under a sky that wouldn't hold still, bands of thin gold and bruised violet, where the air was already too sparse to scatter light the way it used to, the storms building at the edges of every horizon shot. Daylight, the whole time. Nobody waited for dark to move. There wasn't going to be a tomorrow on that ground worth waiting for. The hospital ship's medics worked the worst cases first off every shuttle, the way medics always do, and the transports filled in careful, unhurried order, families boarding by household, nobody separated who didn't have to be. I met the first wave at Harrow, when they came through for processing, and I want to be honest about what struck me, because it wasn't grief, it was disbelief, worn so deep into their faces, it looked almost like calm. The Osserin are slate blue under daylight, paler at the joints, and every one of them stepped off that ramp, blinking like the light at Harrow was a different color than the light they'd left behind, even though it wasn't, even though I checked. An elder named Vesa Korhal-Wren came through near the end of the second day, walking slow on a cane she didn't strictly need, with 3 generations of her household behind her. She stopped at the top of the ramp instead of coming straight down, the way several of them had, just to look at the platform, the daylight through Harrow's long windows, ordinary and unremarkable to me, evidently extraordinary to her. I asked through the translator if she needed help down. She said, "I needed help 11 days ago. I am only now getting around to accepting it," and came down on her own power, refusing my arm and taking my hand instead, which I understood to be a distinction that mattered to her. Behind her household was a younger family, 2 parents and a child small enough to be carried, who had slept through most of the crossing and woke as the shuttle's ramp opened onto Harrow's light. He didn't cry. He just stared, very seriously, at the window behind me, and then asked his mother, in a tone better suited to a much larger question, whether this was a different son. She told him it was the same one, just from somewhere new. He seemed to find that an acceptable answer, and went back to sleep against her shoulder before I had even finished checking their manifest. The flotilla's lead captain came through Harrow once, briefly, to sign transfer paperwork, and I asked her, because someone always asks, and I wanted to hear it stated plainly, why Earth had crossed a quarantine line that 6 other species worth of caution had agreed to respect. She didn't make a speech about it. She said, "We checked. There was nothing to be afraid of. So we made room," and went back to her ship, and that was the whole of it, delivered with about as much weight as someone reporting the weather. By the time the storms closed Austin's near orbit for good, 486,000 of the 490,000 had come through Harrow's intake line. I will not pretend the last few thousand weren't a wound that never closes clean. Some debts to a dying clock simply don't get paid in full, no matter how fast you move. But I have stopped measuring that operation by what the storms took. I measure it by the ramp. I still see it when I close my eyes some nights. Not the ships, not the escort holding the line, not even the assembly's furious cables that came in for months afterward. Just the ramp of the Thessaly Hale, lowered into ordinary daylight, and family after family walking down it, into a life nobody else had been willing to risk giving them, looking at the light like they'd forgotten it could fall on anything but a dying sky.